Guys, in this video, I'm going to be as open and honest about the reality of my marriage, where it was, where it went, and where it is right now as pertains to my addiction, as it pertains to the health of the whole thing and how her and I are doing personally. I want this video to have the freedom to be longer. If you are interested in digging into the nooks and crannies of my personal life, how my mind works, how I perceive my marriage to be going, if you want to hear some raw, ugly truths about some unhealthy qualities about my marriage, particularly before I got sober, then this is a good video for you. When her and I first met, we were an incredible relief to one another as far as a distraction from what our lives were looking like at the time. I'm 34 years old and I met her when I was 21. And when I was 21, I was just trying to get sober and get out of a really toxic relationship that was just riddled in drunk behavior. She was in a relationship that was not healthy, that was not good, and we kind of found freedom in one another. We found safety in one another. We found a bond and a connection with one another. She was also a great distraction when we first met. And she's more than that, of course. I married the girl. I love her. She's my life partner. But I was newly sober, and in my experience, when you're newly sober, you're hardly sane, you're hardly processing emotion and thought properly, and you're not really in a good space to be nurturing another human life. That's just my opinion. My brain was fresh when I was 21 and trying to get sober. I had a lot to work through that I wasn't ready to work through, and Jessie came into my life, and she was polarizing and captivating, and she made me feel good. We fell in lust and eventually in love with one another. But about 6 to 9 months in, that part of the relationship ended, as it does for everybody. The intense hormonal response to being around each other tempered down into something a little more consistent, a little more what I would call normal. And when that happened, all my old thoughts of being insecure, all my own old feelings of sadness, anxiety, depression, they came back. And I had one tool at that time in my life that I was readily able and willing to use, and that was alcohol. So she met me and I was sober, she was sober, and then I found alcohol and I started drinking again. And she got to know me as Noah the drinker. Noah the drinker is not inherently bad, but Noah the drinker has different priorities, different motivations, a different way of processing life. And she had to see that. But at that point, she loved me. And at that point, she was very ignorant as to what it meant to be with me as an alcoholic. And I did my very, very best to be a good person, but my instinct to protect my alcoholism, my instinct to protect my number one coping mechanism was strong. And so I manipulated, I twisted, I lied, and I didn't behave in a way that I'm proud of. I knew what to say and how to say it at that time to get her to believe me that everything was going to be okay, when a lot of the writing was on the wall that me as a drinker wasn't good for her or for me. She is a normie. For those of you that don't know, she doesn't have a substance abuse disorder. But she's seen people with it. It's something she never really wanted. And then as part of her story, coincidentally, she fell for someone who was an alcoholic. From the time we first met to the time I went into rehab, our relationship was defined by streaks of me being sober and working a recovery program to the best of my ability, and then us doing better and being healthier and being happier, to me relapsing, falling into old behaviors, deceptive tendencies, regressive patterns, and us doing worse and worse and worse. As time has gone on, every time I've started drinking again, all the behaviors that come with it, all the cognitive distortions that are coupled and paired with it have amplified. So our collective misery has gotten worse. And then all the times I've gotten sober, everything has gotten that much better. But also over the years, every time that I would relapse, and as she's gotten older and she's learned more about herself, her fuse was shortening. She was learning more. She was getting a clearer picture of who she was. She was growing up, and she was seeing that she didn't want to be with an alcoholic. To be honest, I'm grateful that she didn't abandon a very unhealthy relationship, because today we survived it, and today we have a chance. We'll talk about that. But it really just became more and more difficult to lie to her and convince her that everything was going to be okay, and that I wasn't what I clearly was, which was a drunk. In more ways, of course, than just drinking. I behaved like an alcoholic. and she didn't want anything to do with it anymore. And we fell out of love. We've both openly talked about that. We kind of just learned how to be around each other, but it wasn't pure, it wasn't connected, it wasn't honest, I wasn't the man she married, and I hadn't been for a while. And so we were in a pretty bad state right before I went to rehab for the third time in 2020. We weren't being physically intimate anymore. We weren't really talking truthfully or deeply with one another anymore. She did what she had to do to survive me, which led to a lot of just emotional and mental disconnection. I just wanted to drink. I wanted to be alone. And we got to a really sad and desperate place that I wasn't sure we'd be able to recover from. And I don't think she was sure either. I worried and wondered if this whole thing had run its course. I didn't think I was ever going to be able to get sober. That is one of the most devastating things about relapsing as often and as much as I have. My sense of hope that my story could be different, or that I wasn't going to die a drunk, was just getting smaller, smaller, and smaller. And I think her hope for our life and our marriage together was getting less and less and less, because we're getting older and things weren't getting better, they were getting worse. And that leads us to rehab. I remember her dropping me off at the detox center October 5th, our wedding anniversary. October 5th of 2020. I was an absolute anxious mess. I was beside myself, insane. And she drove away, and I didn't know if I'd ever see her again in the same way that I imagined seeing her, as my wife, as my partner, as my person. I really did worry that I had done too much damage. I worried that she had been through too much. She'd fallen out of love too far. I knew I was out of love too. I just worried. I thought it was all over. It was one of the worst moments of my entire life, being in that detox center, shaking, hot, anxious, detached, overwhelmed, neurotic, wildly insane. It was a sad time, the end of my drinking with her. Most of my nights were alone down here, finding connection, and the only thing that made me feel relief from myself, which was alcohol, and her upstairs alone. It sucked, man. It fucking sucked. It was the worst. It really was the worst. But forged by fire. What has life been like since I got into rehab? Now we're going to transition to that time. I could talk forever about the 10 years, forever. There's so many stories and so many lessons and so many sad truths, and I could talk forever. I love talking, but I'm going to transition now. The first 6 or 7 weeks of rehab, we didn't speak to one another. It's part of the format. I signed up for a 5-month program. I'd only ever gone to 1-month programs. I signed up for something bigger and better. I was feeling desperate. I had a moment of clarity. I went. And for the first 6 or 7 weeks, we didn't have any communication. And I think that was incredibly valuable for both of us. One, you're fucking insane when you first get sober, I think. You really are. You're emotionally unregulated, you're hypersensitive, your thoughts are warped, you're very insecure, you're neurotic, you're paranoid. There's a lot of stuff that goes on when you first get sober if you're a drugger or a drinker of my caliber. And so it makes sense that I would have some distance from her. And in that distance, she was able to breathe. I mean, how effing stressful is it to live with an active alcoholic or drug addict? If you're not able or willing to leave them, which she wasn't, for whatever reason, that's her story. She can talk about it if she wants to someday, I hope. But she had gotten used to such a high level of stress all the time that when I left, I don't think she could have possibly imagined the relief that she was going to feel. Because when I got sober, shit got worse between my ears for a while, but for her, everything slowed down. And it gave her a very, very early picture of the fact that she didn't need me in her life to be okay. That was huge. I'm really grateful for that, even though it was like my biggest fear, because I was going to eventually learn the same thing. I just was at a different point of my recovery. She was on her first step of her emotional recovery, because addiction affects a lot more than the person who's actively addicted to the substance. I had created and helped to create a very sick woman in our relationship, through codependency and enabling and a terrible dynamic of behavior between victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. So she got a breather from me. And when we first started talking, I was nervous. I was insecure. You're kind of figuring out who the fuck you are for the first time in a long time. I'm learning so much in treatment. I'm getting my ass physically kicked in the morning, mentally, emotionally, spiritually kicked in the afternoon. I'm learning how to live with these other men and tolerate different personalities. I'm learning how to deal with so many racing thoughts and anxieties. I almost quit a couple times. I haven't really talked about that. And my wife was home alone with the dogs, free of the burden of her alcoholic husband. And so when we first started talking again on the phone, it was a little awkward, a little weird. I was still not emotionally regulated at that time, and I was very insecure, and I was still learning a lot. But we kind of slowly started to test the waters of reconnection. I had spent a lot of time chewing over something I couldn't prove, but that I worried about, which was that it was too late, that I'd crossed some invisible line with her we wouldn't be able to come back from. But we were patient. And while I was afraid that she was going to leave at any moment, we just took it one conversation at a time. I had this tremendous pressure within myself to show her I was better and different. I worked through that in therapy. She seemed more calm than I remember her seeming before, and we just started to get to know each other again. It felt like ground zero. It's an absolute trip to me that you can be like with someone for as long as we've been together, some 13 years, but be kind of nervous to talk to each other when you get sober. Excited, nervous, overwhelmed, stressed, as if you don't really know this person, because you kind of don't. I mean, your emotional and your mental perception of things is fried, to say the least, when you're in your addiction. I know mine was. So from those initial phone calls and text messages, we started the process, and it was very uncomfortable for me at times. And then we found a little rhythm over the phone, and then we saw each other for the first time after about 2.5 months. And that came with a lot of nerves, a lot of expectations, a lot of stress, a lot of fear, because we didn't really know each other anymore. But we started, and it was uncomfortable. And I was really sensitive. And in some ways she was too. And we were still in our growth period, but it got better. With each transition of getting back to her, there was this discomfort of change. It's something that I've noticed all throughout recovery. Change is uncomfortable. I was just finding rhythms in there, and then they changed something. And I'd have to adapt and learn for myself and then process with my team. And she was doing the same. We learned a lot from that first visit in person to our first overnight to when I checked out about the unhealthy realities of our relationships. I had to do a lot of writing assignments and treatment about her. She was given some assignments from my therapist to share with me in a family group session about me. And we cried. I had so much guilt, and I was so overcome with shame that I wasn't really able to meet her as my new self until I processed so much shame and guilt and sadness and insecurity and fear. And so I wrote and I wrote. I did assignment after assignment until I was able to forgive that drunk, alcoholic, married man for not being a better man. I was able to separate Noah, the alcoholic, and the diseased person versus Noah, the authentic person. And eventually I was able to bring my authentic person to a therapy session with her, give her a chance to just be angry and cry and just be vulnerable and open about how miserable she's been. And I was able just to listen and empathize as opposed to take on her emotion and sympathize and honor and respect these very real feelings that she had. And I was so proud of her for doing it. And the more regulated I've gotten, the more self-assured I've gotten, the more she has as well. And so I got out of rehab and we had to integrate again and get to know each other again. And that took a little while to get used to. She'd gotten very used to her home without me. I'd gotten used to sleeping at night without her. But we tolerated that discomfort and we got to know each other again with our new tools. She did something super badass, and she agreed to go to her own treatment, her own therapy, a group therapy, an aftercare program that my treatment program put on. And she went, and it was so uncomfortable for her. And she had the opportunity to do a lot of the painful, very, very difficult personal work that I was doing in treatment. And suddenly we started speaking the same language a little bit. Suddenly we started learning the same coping skills. We started learning how to not victimize one another with one another. We learned how to take more ownership and more autonomy over our thoughts and our feelings and our wants and our desires. We both have had to learn to express wants versus needs and know how to differentiate the two. We both had to learn how to empathize and not sympathize so much with one another. Meaning that if she's having a bad day, that doesn't mean I'm having a bad day, and vice versa. We've learned a lot about wanting each other, but not needing each other. And that's been huge. I think she got her first dose of that when I first left, and then we both kind of got to experience that in different ways as I came back. And it was something that was impressed upon me in therapy, is that it was really, really important that we understand that we don't need one another, and that we don't want to be codependent to one another. We want one another, and we've been building towards that, which means having our own lives, taking care of ourselves, taking responsibility for ourselves, and then sharing our lives together and supporting each other in a healthy way. We both want healthy partners now. I want a healthy partner in recovery, and so does she. And so one of the cool things we did was both just tell each other, this is what I want from you. Are you able to do that? We use something called the 5-part communication system. And it works really, really well, telling each other what we saw, what we heard, what we thought about what we saw or what we heard, what we felt, what we want, and ultimately asking if the other person is willing. We're getting really good when we have triggers and activations at communicating them right away. I straight up say this to her all the time now. I go, ooh, my brain didn't like that. Ooh, my brain's telling me something's wrong. And we're way more attuned with one another. So it's been dope. It's been really, really good, and it's getting better and better and better. But wow, has it been uncomfortable at times to relearn how to love one another, to relearn how to communicate to one another, to learn and come to terms with our shortcomings and our character defects, to kind of have our reality stripped from the ground up and try to rebuild ourselves as people. We knew we didn't want to go back to the way things were. Even in past attempts at sobriety, we had to take a really, really hard look at what wasn't working, kind of use that insight to lay a foundation for a new life together. I'm really proud of us, and I think it's going really, really well. I do feel in love with my wife again. I see like a confidence in her that I've never seen before. I have no doubt that she understands that she doesn't need me in her life, but she wants me if I'm healthy. We're getting better and better and better about setting boundaries and holding those boundaries with one another and within ourselves, taking full responsibility for ourselves. It's been so powerful. One of the things that is really important to me is to no longer come to her with my problems, but let her know what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through, and what I'm doing about it. I've got my own support. She's got her own support. And then, of course, we come together and support one another. But yeah, it's been powerful. It's been real. It's been good. And it hasn't been perfect, but it is getting better and better. I like the man I'm becoming. I'm so proud and attracted to the woman she's becoming. And I'm glad that we are still together. I'm glad that we still have this chance at a good life together. And it takes daily effort and daily work, but we are doing that work. And that's what's going on. That's the truth about my marriage. I have a million stories I could tell you, but I think that is the meat and potatoes of what has been going on. I want to be able to express that things are just so full right now and going so well, but they're not perfect. They're not perfect. I can get my feelings hurt over things that are inside me that I sometimes project, and we can talk about it. And I could give you a lot of little examples of growing pains, but no disrespecting one another, no raising our voices to one another, a lot of patience and tenderness and kindness for one another, and then a lot of laughter and a lot of food and a lot of being social, and we're doing things together we've never done before. We're making plans that we've never made before. We're trying hard, man. We're trying hard to just have a healthy marriage, and I'm really grateful. I think that's everything I want to say. If you are in a relationship with an addict or an alcoholic, just know that I'm rooting for you. I know that it is not easy. I really, really strongly encourage you to get help for yourself. I think that's the most important thing for you to do. And if you're watching this and you're struggling with addiction, I recommend that you check out Treehouse, and I recommend that you get support for yourself as well. I never could have imagined that at over half a year sober now, I would be this even keeled, this consistent, this calm, this stable. I could not have imagined, but it's taken a lot of effort. Share with me your personal stories. Leave Jessie or myself a comment if you guys would like to see her in a video. In what capacity would you want to see her in a video? I'd love for her to get on here and share a little bit more about her experience. And just know that I really, really appreciate you. I appreciate the opportunity, period, to just talk to you guys and to share my thoughts and my feelings. So share yours as well. If you've never commented, do it. Participate. It's fun. I think it's fun. And I know that I'm rooting for you. 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time, we can get through what we are going through, and we can do it together. Never forget, you guys. Please never, never forget that we can do hard things. We can do hard things, and we can do it sober and sane. And if you are a drinker, I don't condemn you. You're safe here. Keep coming back and spending time with me. And I hope you heard something or saw something that made you feel good and made you want to come see me again. All right, you guys, I appreciate you. I can't say that enough. Jesse, if you happen to watch this video, I love you. I can't say that enough. And I'm rooting for every couple who's trying to reconnect and find stable ground together after addiction has done its thing. All right, see you guys in the next video. Adios. Knock that out of the park.